I was reborn without you. Just days before my death, the apocalypse was coming. But I didn't panic. I didn't just stockpile food or build a simple shelter to hide in. Instead, I dedicated every second to my health. I poured all my energy into modifying a beast, a 1,000-ton heavy-duty truck. And why did I do it? Because humanity was about to transform into mechanical armor. The vehicle in your name would become your new body. The wealthy students and young elites chose supercars for their transformation. Others turned themselves into massive, imposing off-roaders. In my past life, I only had a shared bicycle I used for my girlfriend. I ended up being crushed by a mechanical monster. It was 3 stories tall, and I watched my life fade into the gray sky. Everything turned to static, sinking into a deadly darkness. Then, suddenly, I bolted upright in my bed. My hands clawed at the air, desperately trying to push it away. The mechanical giant was crushing me, and my body was screaming that it couldn't take any more. My heavy, ragged breathing echoed through the tiny room. I threw my head back, my entire body stiff with terror. I glanced at the phone on the nightstand as the screen lit up. The date was June 15, 2025. The blue light illuminated my pale face, drenched in a cold sweat. My pupils contracted as the realization hit. I had exactly 7 days until the end of the world. I bolted out of bed, my heart racing like an engine. I rushed to the window to see if anything had changed. I yanked the curtains open, revealing the flickering neon lights of the city. In the distance, traffic on the viaduct flowed like a chaotic mess. The taillights stretched out like a river, forming a dragon of fire. In my past life, I learned the truth too late. The apocalypse arrived with a sudden surge of cosmic energy. They called it the mechanical fire seed. It swept across the planet, awakening every vehicle to consume and evolve. It turned them into human exoskeletons, but the rules of transformation were brutal. They obeyed the strict laws of mass conservation and function. My eyes were shot through with blood. I looked like a total maniac, like someone who had just escaped from the depths of an asylum. I sat back on the bed and grabbed my phone. I opened Alipay and my banking apps. A savage smile spread across my face. If I were the same man as before, I'd be worried. But I'm not that man anymore. I used to be an honest person. I even paid off all my debts. I always paid them on time. But in 7 days, the world order will collapse. Cash will turn back into scrap paper. The credit system will vanish into thin air. Every cent will be reduced to zero. But, in my opinion, it'll be the most useless thing in the world. Within hours, my bank account showed a staggering figure, 10 million, and now, it was time to go car shopping. I headed to the outskirts of what they call the city, out to the fringes of Lynch. There were no luxuries there. No gleaming glass walls or saleswomen in miniskirts and stockings. Just yellow sand and swirling dust. A desolate, wild landscape. I approached the makeshift office, a rusted, modified shipping container. The space was cramped and cluttered. It was choking with smoke. A few rough men in blue overalls were playing cards. One man with a coarse, fleshy face looked up, annoyed. He exhaled a cloud of smoke and said, "If you want a job, it's over there. If you're selling insurance, get out. Don't say another word." Without a word, I pulled out my phone and showed him my balance. I want to buy a vehicle. My voice wasn't loud, but it was steady, cutting right through the noise. The man froze, caught between closing the door and opening it wider. He squinted at the screen, at the figure displayed there. Instantly, he slammed his cards down on the table. His annoyance vanished, replaced by a groveling smile. He scrambled to his feet. "Boss, I must be blind. My name is Saul. I'm the manager. What are you looking for? A Scania? A Volvo? If it's for logistics, I'd suggest a Yong. I'm not doing logistics." I cut him off. My gaze drifted past his shoulder. I looked out at the massive lot. It looked like a graveyard. A graveyard for steel corpses. I want the biggest one. Which one has the highest tonnage? Manager Saw stood there, perplexed. He scanned my cheap clothes, thinking I was just some rich brat who stole his parents' money. "The biggest, boss? We have some mining dump trucks that were just decommissioned. But they aren't just vehicles. They're massive construction titans. They aren't street legal." But 10 minutes later, we were there. We stood in the deepest, most remote corner of the lot. The moment I saw that monster, a surge of pure joy hit me. My breath hitched in my throat for a second. Before me sat a colossal mining truck, an XCM 200. Modified and parked in the corner, its chassis towered over me. It was taller than a 4-story building. This beast was originally named the CNSE. A massive corporation commissioned it. A mining company from the Northwest had it custom built. But the owner went bankrupt and the truck was seized. Empty weight, 500,000 kilos. Payload capacity, 600 tons. Total weight at full load, 1,160 tons. My pupils dilated as I stared at it. In my past life, the Ferrari that Shang-Chan was so proud of weighed only 1.5 tons. Even Bao Shizi, the monster that crushed me, wouldn't stand a chance. About 50 tons, that was it. But the moment the world falls apart, in the apocalypse, according to the law of conservation of mass, what kind of weapon would these 1,160 tons of steel become? I'd be no ordinary warrior. I'd be a titan, a god. Manager Shao let out a scoff. "Boss, this is just a display piece. It's only meant for looking at. You can't even get license plates for it. To move it, you'd have to dismantle the entire system. But I was going to use it. Besides, this beast drinks fuel like crazy. One tap of the gas, and you've burned through a fortune. Honestly, it's not even worth keeping as a decoration. It just takes up way too much space. If you try to do anything with it, it's a nightmare. I cut him off. My feverish gaze was locked onto the sky, staring up at the towering cabin. Manager. Xiao stood there, completely speechless. I asked you how much it costs. I'm taking it, I told him. I didn't turn back. Thank you. I stared him down like a hungry wolf eyeing its prey. My gaze terrified him. He stumbled back, even though this man dealt in massive trucks every day. It's from a seizure, he stammered. An industrial monster. The original price was $1 million. Actually, it was over 20 million, but it has depreciated since then. He held up a hand and gestured. 5 million, and not a penny less. Without saying another word, I pulled out a card and tossed it. The bank card landed on the hood of a nearby car. Charge it. 10 minutes later, I was sitting in the driver's seat, a space as vast as a throne. I looked down at Manager Xiao, who looked like a tiny mouse from up here. I felt a surge of satisfaction. This was the perspective of a conqueror. I slammed it into gear. I released the handbrake. I floored the accelerator. The tires screeched against the pavement. With a deafening roar from the engine, this 1100 horsepower monster began to move its massive weight. It rolled forward slowly, heading straight for the perimeter. I was going to tear right through the heavy-duty fencing. Manager Xiao watched in horror as the truck, like a wild buffalo, ignored the designated path. I didn't need the main gate. I was making my own exit. Who was going to stop me? The engine roared as I charged toward the open road. The desert was waiting, and I was ready to fly. Nothing could stand in front of this rolling fortress. It was an incomparable feeling of power. The vibration and the roar filled my chest. Finally, a wide grin spread across my face. But just having this steel shell wasn't enough. With only 7 days left before the end, I needed more. I had just enough time to arm this beast to the teeth. I headed to the outskirts of Linhai City, to the junkyard paradise of illegal modifications, a place where laws didn't exist. I drove my rolling fortress toward a massive structure. It was a giant industrial workshop, the headquarters of Lei Ji Heavy Industries. I slammed on the brakes. The hiss of the air brakes sounded like a jet engine. A massive cloud of dust kicked up around me. The sheer inertia made the 100-ton monster lurch forward. It felt like a beast bowing to its master. That single movement was enough to get their attention. The mechanics inside stopped what they were doing. They stared at the machine in pure shock. I looked down at them and thought, time to get to work. At the entrance of the hangar, their tools fell to the floor. They were paralyzed with shock. Then, a burly, middle-aged man stepped forward. His name was Wang Dalai, the best mechanic in the history of this junkyard city, a man who only cared about cold, hard cash. He tilted his head back. His neck strained just to see me up in the cabin. He swallowed hard and shouted, "Hey friend, I think you're lost. This is a workshop, not an exhibition. That thing is going to crush the foundations of my business." I pushed the door open. I climbed down the side of the ladder, which felt as steep as a mountain, until I stood right in front of Wang Dalai. I didn't say a single word. My cold aura was enough to freeze the air. That's just what someone who survived the apocalypse does. Staying silent isn't just about keeping quiet. It's a calculated move. "Thanks," I said, pulling a folded blueprint from my pocket. "Take a look." He grabbed it, and with a single glance, his finger twitched. His brow furrowed deep with concentration. "Can you do it? If not, I'll take my business elsewhere." "Can I?" "Of course I can." A flash of pure greed sparked in Wang Dalai's eyes. "But it's too much work. Just cutting and welding those plates will kill me. Besides, the time frame you're asking for is impossible. 3 days. I raised a hand. 500,000 for the labor. Materials are extra. Wang Dalai's breathing hit a frantic pace. 500,000 credits. It was enough to live like a king for 3 years. Wang Dalai dropped his wrench. "Brothers, wake up. Everyone get up. We've got a massive job." Just as the workers were starting to toil away with newfound fervor, the roar of a high-performance engine echoed at the entrance as a red Ferrari SF90 thundered into the yard. The door swung open. A foot wearing a limited edition Air Jordan stepped out, followed by a young man in sunglasses and designer clothes. It was Shang-san, the same Shang-san from my past life, the one who, at the start of the apocalypse, turned his sports car into a suit of agile armor. He stole the only thing I had left and threw me to the zombies. The rich kid who always mocked me for being a delivery boy, riding a cheap shared bike, but not this time. Right now, I felt strangely calm, standing in the shadow of a giant tire, like a leopard lying in wait. I watched that stuffed turkey with cold, predatory eyes. Shang-san acted like he was about to meet the president of the republic. He took off his glasses, covered his nose in disgust, and spoke. He looked at Wang Dalai and barked, "Hey, old man. My spoiler is here, and the nitro system too. Max it out for the club race. I have to win the supercar division this time." Wang Dalai gave a flattering smile. "It's already here, young Master Shang. It's pure carbon fiber, just like the ones they use in F1. Your car will be so light, it'll practically fly." But then his eyes shifted. He finally noticed the massive mining truck looming over him. It completely eclipsed the hangar and his precious red Ferrari. This monster was a literal mountain of steel, an insurmountable wall that reached the very roof of the shop. The Ferrari didn't even reach the height of the truck's axle. Shang-san's face twisted. He walked toward it with a deep scowl. and tapped a freshly welded steel plate with the tip of his sunglasses. Hey, old man, what is this? Wong, since when did you start collecting scrap metal this massive? And it's blocking my light, you know? He turned around and ran right into my death stare. Shang-san froze for a full second. Then he burst into an exaggerated laugh. Wait, isn't it? Who were you again? The insurance salesman? Or the delivery boy? Ha ha, what are you doing here? Don't tell me this thing is yours. Have you lost your mind, you pauper? Why would you buy this? To haul bricks? Or more like to cause accidents? If this hits the street and gets in the way, who would dare crash into it? Ha ha ha, I'm dying. I didn't say a word. I just watched him in silence, like I was looking at a dead man. That look made Shang-san feel strangely uncomfortable. He wiped the smile off his face and stepped closer, poking my chest with his finger. Hey, speak up, mute. I'm talking to you. Thank you. Now move this pile of scrap metal. My car needs to get into the shop. I looked down at the finger poking my chest. Then I glanced over at his flashy red Ferrari. Shang-san, I finally spoke, my voice raspy like grinding metal. Enjoy your speed, because in 4 days, it'll only be good for running away. What did you say? He started cursing. Shang-san flew into a rage and raised his hand to strike me, but I moved. It was like a blur. I caught his wrist midair right in that instant. Shang-san felt like his bones were being peeled apart. He looked at me in horror, finally, realizing that the submissive guy he knew was gone forever. Now I was radiating a murderous intent that made his life wither away. His legs began to tremble uncontrollably. Get lost. I gave a sharp shove, and Shang-san lost his balance. He stumbled backward like a clumsy drunk. He flailed his arms wildly to stay upright. He nearly face-planted right into a barrel of waste oil. You're dead. Just you wait, he screamed, faking a courage he didn't have. But under my cold stare, he didn't dare take a single step closer. He scrambled back into his flashy toy. Old Wong, fix my Ferrari first, or you won't see a single cent. I ignored his barking. There were only 3 days left until the end. I drove my newly modified truck straight to the heart of the city. I headed for the largest logistics center in Linhai City. I pulled up to a massive private warehouse. The smell of chemicals and grease filled the air. I need fuel, private stock, -35 grade low-temp diesel. I'm buying every single drop you have in stock. The owner, a fat and cunning-looking man, stepped forward. He squinted as he examined my strange, armored vehicle. Look, friend, inspections are strict these days. I need you to be honest. Do you even have a permit to buy this much? I didn't change my expression for a second. I'll pay a premium over the market price. 20% extra in cash, and I want it in 200-liter barrels. I want every single one of them filled to the brim. I told him to load them onto my truck bed with a forklift immediately. Half an hour later, the heavy barrels of diesel were ready. They began stacking up high on the back of my rig. Once the forklift finished the job, I headed straight to the wholesale market. I wasn't there to buy snacks or luxuries. I went for the essentials. 500 boxes of military-grade compressed biscuits. I added 200 cases of canned meat and 2 tons of vacuum-packed rice. With only 24 hours left before the apocalypse, the air grew heavy. A strange tension began to settle over the city. Most people were still oblivious, going about their daily routines. But the more sensitive ones started noticing the anomalies. The sky turned a sickly yellowish-orange, and the clouds hung impossibly low. It felt as if the horizon itself was closing in on us. A faint, metallic scent of rust began to float through the streets. At the zoo, the animals stopped eating and wouldn't stop roaring. Stray dogs were hiding all over the streets. They crawled into the sewers, and even the police signals started to fail. Cell phones glitched, and news reports flickered in and out. Experts on TV debated about auroras and geomagnetic anomalies. They wondered if sunspots were intensifying, a dark omen. Did I know it wasn't just a sunspot? Absolutely. It was the mechanical seed closing in on Earth. A high-dimensional energy wave was coming to rewrite the laws of physics. It would grant life to steel and bring death to flesh and bone. I drove my fortress forward. I moved slowly toward the point of origin. I chose my spot carefully. It wasn't a home or a shelter. It wasn't a bustling district, but a specific point in the city. Out on the periphery, I found an unfinished viaduct near a dead-end alley. It had high ground and a clear view, perfect for attacking or defending. In the first wave of the apocalypse, the impact didn't come from mechanical beasts. It came from the cars themselves, the very machines sitting right next to us. Imagine rush hour with thousands of people trapped, thousands of cars stuck on the mutant viaduct. All at once, those car doors will turn into a death trap. Metal frames will twist into razor-sharp fangs. Seatbelts will snap tight like constricting snakes. They'll become tentacles while the seats and dashboards shift, transforming into mechanical digestive stomachs, devouring their passengers alive. That's the true face of the end. It will be a literal hell on Earth. I parked my massive mining truck right at the edge, the very end of the broken bridge, with the cabin positioned, facing outward, ready for anything. Prepared to launch at a moment's notice, I pulled a photo from my chest pocket. I had found it in my past life while I was on the run. Even now, you could see the silhouette. The blurry image of a girl. She was mine. My only pillar. She was my spiritual anchor in my previous life after I left the church. A survivor who once gave me the chance to see my son. She shared half a loaf of bread with me before dying in a disaster. She was lost in a zombie nest, but in this life, I won't need anyone to give me bread. Time was slipping away. Minute by minute, second by second. It was 11:58 a.m. on June 22nd. Only 2 minutes remained before the end of the world. I looked down through the steel mesh of my window at the city of Miami. High noon was approaching. It was the loudest hour of the day at the intersection below. The cars were flowing through the streets like a river. 10 seconds left. The gray, dawn sky suddenly shifted. The yellowish tint turned into something else entirely. A dazzling, deep purple hue took over as the clouds began to swirl. They formed a massive vortex in the sky, like a poisonous purple eye staring down at the earth. Every electronic device and piece of technology failed at once. Screens went black, the power grid paralyzed, and the world fell into a deathly silence. I felt the air leave my lungs. I took a deep breath and gripped the controls. My knuckles turned white against the steering wheel. Right then, an indescribable shockwave tore through the neighborhood. A purple light fell from the zenith of the sky. It swept across the globe in an instant, but I didn't mutate. Reality itself was what mutated. Inside the vehicles, the needles on the dashboard gauges went absolutely haywire, all pinning themselves into the red zone. The center console screen suddenly flickered to life, but it wasn't a rigid interface anymore. An electronic eye opened, emitting a brilliant crimson glow right from the center console. It blinked. Then a deep, mechanical voice, filled with absolute submission, echoed directly inside my mind. System self-check complete. Vehicle form, heavy mining fortress, detecting massive quantities of modified components assimilating into reality. Mecha fortress, Tyrant, awaits your orders. I stared into that glowing red electronic eye, a smirk spreading across my face. Time to work, partner. I shoved the lever forward with all my might, and the massive chassis lurched. The black beast roared to life with a crushing aura, lunging toward the hellish intersection. In that exact moment, I felt myself disappearing. Or rather, my nervous system extended infinitely. My optic nerves no longer limited to my eyes, but wired into 4 armored HD infrared headlights and the panoramic roof radar. My skin was no longer a fragile epidermis, but a cold, thick layer of plating. Special reactive armor steel plates covered me, and my heart had become that roaring 3,650 horsepower diesel engine. Every piston stroke felt like a powerful heartbeat. This was mechanization, not just driving, but a total fusion. A waterfall of data cascaded across my vision, not from any existing OS, but the awakened consciousness of this steel monster projecting directly onto my retina. I couldn't help but let out a groan. This sensation of absolute control, compared to the flimsy bicycle frame that fell apart in my past life, was like the difference between heaven and earth. I surged forward. That intersection was now a scene of chaos. In this Azura's battlefield, hundreds of cars completed their modular transformation. Simultaneously, they were no longer vehicles, but beasts of steel. A white Toyota SUV roared like a wild animal, its hood splitting open to become a mouth full of razor-sharp teeth, biting into the small hatchback in front of it. Suddenly, a red dot flashed onto my radar. A mutated bus had locked onto me as I sat on that broken bridge, a colossal monster. It was a double-decker bus, but now it looked like a giant iron centipede. Its body was elongated, its windows shattered, and jagged metal limbs were bursting out of them. The chassis groaned as it twisted into a predatory shape. Its face was formed from seat frames and twisted scrap, while the massive windshield displayed a glitching, coated expression. It saw me as a feast. It wanted to devour my truck. This was the initial phase of the mutation. The larger mechas immediately begin their hunt. They instinctively target other mechas, devouring their metallic cores, just to force an evolution. The bus centipede let out a shrill, metallic screech. It lunged forward with terrifying speed, charging frantically up the ramp of the broken bridge toward me. Dozens of metal appendages tore at the ground, kicking up a storm of sparks. Inside the beast, I could still see dozens of people trapped, zombified passengers, twitching as the machine consumed the last of their lives. They looked like parasites, but I did nothing. I just watched in silence. The centipede lunged forward just as the vehicle's frame shifted. The bus unhinged its massive iron jaws, opening wide enough to swallow a whole car. It was ready to tear me apart bolt by bolt. Just as it was about to graze my truck's bumper, I finally released the brake and felt the beast shift. My Tyrant fortress began to move slowly. It stood its ground against that terrifying monster, a massive wall of steel spanning over 1,000 meters. Thousands of tons of pure destruction. Sudden acceleration wasn't even necessary. All it had to do was roll forward. Even at 10 miles per hour, its kinetic energy was astronomical. It was pure destructive force as the bus tried to land a desperate ramming blow. The centipede slammed directly into my V-shaped bumper. In an instant, its entire front end buckled. I kept driving. I steered the fortress directly over the creature. The entire body of the bus was caught underneath. My massive, towering wheels rolled over it without a shred of mercy. I felt the frame buckle and flatten beneath me. It was nothing more than a pile of scrap metal now. I gripped the wheel and turned hard. The colossal weight of the fortress traced an imposing curve at the end of the bridge. Dust and debris roared into the air as I descended. I headed down the ramp. My target was clear. I was heading straight for the city center, where a meeting with an old friend awaited me. The intersection was no longer a place for humans. It had become an arena of cold, hard steel. This was the end of the line for the week. In the heart of the city of Caceres, a flash of crimson caught my eye. Shang Tsung's Ferrari SF90 had transformed completely. It no longer hugged the asphalt. It had risen. It had become a humanoid mecha standing 4 meters tall. That was the signature trait of the supercar-type mechas. They could take on a lifelike form. A complete humanoid shape from the very start, its body a deep crimson. The aerodynamic armor shimmered with a sinister light under the sun. Its wheels had shifted into thrusters on its shoulders and legs. 2 razor-sharp blades, forged from carbon fiber spoilers, extended from its arms. Ha! Power. This is real power. Shang Tsung's arrogant voice boomed through the mecha speakers across the neighborhood. He was reveling in the thrill of the slaughter, using his unnatural speed. He had already sliced a cheap taxi in half when it tried to attack him. That clumsy vehicle was dismantled before it could even graze him. Shang Tsung was untouchable. He maneuvered his mecha, dancing through traffic like a god. The rush of the kill and the sheer velocity inflated his twisted vanity to the absolute breaking point. I wondered, what about that poor devil, that idiot who bought the giant mining truck? I bet he can't even transform that hunk of junk. But right then, the earth began to tremble. It was a faint vibration at first, like distant thunder, but it quickly grew into a rhythmic, heavy pulse. The streetlights began to shudder and groan. Debris on the ground started to rattle. Pebbles danced frantically across the asphalt. Shang Tsung stopped dead in his tracks. He squinted through the dust, his arrogance turning to doubt. At the far end of the road, through a cloud of grit, a colossal black silhouette appeared. My fortress didn't transform into a humanoid. It was far too massive for that. A human shape would only restrict its true power. It stayed in vehicle form, a beast taller than a 4-story building. It was so wide it choked the entire avenue. I didn't need to dodge. I didn't need to maneuver. I simply drove forward. Every abandoned car and mutated mecha I touched was swatted aside like a fly. They were launched into the air as I crushed the very earth. In an instant, inside Shang Tsung's electronic eye, an incredible flow of data began to stream. He blinked, unable to believe the readings on his HUD. Even with the change in form, he recognized that silhouette. It was ugly, gargantuan, and terrifying. It was a nightmare made of moving metal. How could a mountain of iron move with such speed? Envy began to boil over inside his chest. Fear flooded his mind as he gripped the controls. His red lightning roared, thrusters spitting blue flames. He pushed the machine to its absolute limit. The red mecha groaned under the extreme pressure. It became nothing more than a crimson blur. A mirage of steel cutting through the dust. Was he really going to risk an all-out collision? In a mere 2 seconds, he cleared 100 meters of scorched earth. He raised his high-frequency carbon fiber blade. He leveled the weapon with murderous intent. He was aiming directly for my side tire. He was going for the truck's wheels. His tactic was clear, a direct, aggressive strike. He wanted to take out my legs. I watched him make his move, and I had to admit, it was impressive. If he succeeded, I'd be completely at his mercy. I watched the red dot closing in on the corner of my radar. He was pushing for even more speed. The indicator on my screen was flickering with dizzying intensity. But to me, it was like watching a fly buzzing around. A fly trying to stop a freight train. I thought, not a bad speed for a bug. His blade gleamed with a blood-red light. Then, the impact of the strike echoed through the air. A sharp, screeching metallic crunch followed. But the scene of cutting through me like butter that Shang Tsung imagined never happened. His high-frequency blade was supposed to be unstoppable. Instead, it slammed hard. It hit the 20-centimeter anti-explosion chain mesh covering my chassis. Sparks erupted near the tire, and in the very next second, Shang Tsung's blade snapped clean in half. His eyes flew open in pure horror. Before he could even think about retreating, I made my move. A massive recoil force surged through the entire city block. His arm, that fragile thing, that carbon fiber limb of his, couldn't handle the impact and shattered into a million pieces. I gave the steering wheel a slight turn. My massive 4-meter tires responded, loaded with hundreds of tons of weight. The momentum was unstoppable. The truck grazed Shang Tsung. It was like stepping on an ant. Just a light brush of the tire, and a sickening crunch echoed through the cabin. That red streak he was so proud of crumpled instantly against my brute force. Half his body was dragged under the wheels and flattened into the asphalt like a thin sticker. A system notification flashed before my eyes. Level 1 sports type mutated entity, annihilated. Reward received, evolution fragment. A rare speed module X1. I looked at the notification and shook my head. He hadn't even left a scratch. I just kept accelerating. Crushing Shang Tsung was like swatting a mosquito. Getting out of the truck wasn't even worth the effort. It wasn't even worth stopping for. The sky suddenly went dark, not from clouds, but because a swarm had blocked out the sun. A high-pitched screech pierced the air from above. I snapped my head up to look. Through the panoramic sunroof, I saw a nightmare from my past life. Steel griffins, a type of flying mechanical beast. They were fused together from passenger planes and helicopters. Even swarms of drones were part of them. They were massive. They descended like a plague, casting a shadow over the ruins. Watching from the clouds, their eyes were locked on. Their target was the fortress, the Tyrant fortress moving across the land. Just then, the ground shook with even more violence. At the end of the street, the pavement split wide open, and then, a giant head emerged. It was covered in scales. As a head shaped like an excavator blade emerged, my expression finally turned serious. That business with Shang Tsung? That was just the appetizer. Now, the real banquet of the apocalypse had just been served. I reached out and pressed down hard on a red button on the console. Behind the hopper of the massive truck, a dual 30mm automatic turret was revealed. It was top-tier weaponry that cost me a fortune. I originally sourced it from the black market. I licked my lips, my eyes burning with a wild urge to fight. Let me show you why caliber is the only truth. 3 steel griffins, circling in the clear sky. They clearly underestimated the anti-aircraft capabilities of this black steel beast. They retracted their mechanical wings and dove toward me in formation. Their ventral acid compartments slid open. Corrosive liquid churned inside. A toxic green glow, ready to be unleashed. I sat in the cabin, watching. The holographic screen flickered to life in front of me. 3 red targeting reticles locked onto the aerial targets. I squeezed the trigger gently. That little red button, right on the joystick. A terrifying sound erupted, like a giant piece of canvas being ripped apart. It echoed through the wasteland immediately. A storm of metal, thousands of rounds per minute. 200-meter-long jets of fire erupted from the back of the truck. Tracer rounds poured out from the hopper. Orange streaks drew 2 deadly lines across the somber sky. The first one, the griffin that dared to lead the charge. It didn't even have time to dodge. The beast just exploded in midair. A brilliant, artificial firework of flesh and metal. Countless burning fragments rained down like a storm of embers. They slammed into the rusted, abandoned cars below. I watched the carnage, my expression remaining cold and impassive. With a slight flick of my wrist, I tilted the joystick to the left. The wall of fire swept horizontally across the horizon. The other 2 griffins finally realized the mortal danger they were in. They let out shrill cries of pure terror. They flapped their wings, desperately trying to climb and escape. But the rotation speed of my auto turret was far superior to their ascent. The stream of lead caught the second griffin mid-climb. The rounds shredded through its entire lower body. Its guts and armor simply vanished under the pressure. Losing all balance, it spun out of control like a kite with a snapped string. It plummeted toward the ruins of the city. It smashed through the glass facade of an old office building. The third griffin met an even worse fate. It tried to spray its acid in a final, desperate act of defiance. It tried to spray acid at the turret, but a burst of shells tore straight through its open mouth. The rounds ripped through it from head to tail, proving that aerial acrobatics are useless against this much firepower. But before I could even savor this brief moment of victory, a violent, bone-shaking thud echoed from beneath the truck. The entire vehicle groaned under the impact. Even with a chassis weighing over 1,000 tons, the massive truck shuddered violently. The asphalt beneath me rippled like water and peeled away instantly. The monster that had been stalking us from the shadows finally decided to show its face. It had been lurking deep underground all week, waiting for this exact moment. It was a mutated heavy excavator, a mechanical nightmare turned flesh. A massive, rusted beast of steel and hunger. It erupted from the earth right alongside the truck. The sheer force of its emergence sent debris flying everywhere. It opened its jagged steel maw wide. It lunged forward like a predator, striking its prey. It clamped its jaws onto the Ford's rear left wheel with crushing force. A sickening crack echoed through the cabin as the metal buckled. Sparks and shrapnel sprayed in every direction. If this were a normal truck, that would have been the end of it. The damage would have been impossible to repair. That bite would have snapped a standard axle, but it hit the wheel instead. It slammed right into the anti-explosion chain armor that I had specifically installed, measuring several centimeters thick. The excavator's bucket got snagged on the iron treads, letting out a horrific, ear-piercing screech as it ground to a halt, and I glanced at the rearview mirror. The metal was weathered by sun and wind. Seeing that insignificant thing clinging to my tire, trying to flip this colossus, I let out a mocking laugh. Did it really have no idea what true weight felt like? The single-armed mutant excavator began to retract its limb. It pulled its hydraulic arm back with pure fury, desperately trying to lift this massive mining truck. I thought, first, I'll show you what crushing industrial power looks like. I slammed the gear into reverse and floored the accelerator, feeling the gigantic wheels bite into the earth. The massive tires began to spin. As I roared backward, the mutant biting the tire couldn't even make a sound. Trying to jump me was its final mistake. I just wanted to go home. It tried to drag me, but my colossal torque dragged it instead. I slammed its cabin face first into the ground. The hydraulic cylinder on its massive arm couldn't handle the pressure and shattered into a million pieces. Hydraulic oil sprayed into the air like a geyser. Then, the truck's rear wheel climbed onto the wreck. I showed no mercy as I rolled over the excavator's body. It was like a steamroller over a soda can, done in 5 seconds. The beast was flattened into a thin sheet of metal fused with the asphalt. A system notification popped up. Level 2 construction mutant eliminated. High-strength alloy plus 200 obtained. Core automatically absorbed. I stopped the truck and shifted back into first gear. A half-meter deep dent was left in the pavement, along with a pile of scrap. In this world, the only thing that could move me would have to be heavier than I am, and for now, it doesn't exist. The battle was over. The intersection fell into a heavy silence. In that deathly quiet, the 24 men from the Church of St. John watched me. Low-level mutants that used to be the biggest threats in history were scattered everywhere. The ones that used to rule these streets were now trembling on the ground, or fleeing in absolute terror. I didn't care about them. I didn't even bother to look. Ignoring that trash, I fixed my gaze on the wreckage of the destroyed machine. In the apocalypse, killing isn't the hard part. Killing isn't even the goal, it's the resources. Those materials are the only thing that truly matters for survival. I pressed a button on my control panel to select an option. The signal echoed through the ruins of the city. Several mechanical tentacles emerged from the sides of my vehicle. They were repair arms I had installed back at the workshop. Now, they had become my most efficient scavengers. One tentacle stabbed into the remains of the excavator with surgical precision. It dug deep into the twisted metal and extracted a crystal core emitting a faint blue light. Next, it was time to harvest the rest. I crushed the remains while moving forward. I watched the mechanical arms work as I cleared the battlefield. I scanned the area coldly, looking past the windows of the nearby buildings. Several pairs of terrified eyes were peeking out from the shadows. They were survivors who had just witnessed this godlike slaughter. If I were the man from my past life, maybe things would be different. I might have waved at them, or even tried to save them. But the man I am now only knows how to withdraw. I looked away with indifference, closed my window, and prepared to leave. It was time to fire it up. The engine roared to life. This is who I am now. I'm just a passing trucker, lucky enough to survive. I steered my fortress toward the city limits. My target was the logistics zone on the outskirts of the urban sprawl. The highway leading there cut right through the heart of the city, and it presented a very peculiar scene. The road ahead was blocked. A massive mining path lay before me. The wreckage seemed to cover the earth and sky. I pushed forward like an icebreaker, tossing everything aside. Without a shred of mercy, I cleared the low-level zombie vehicles blocking my path. One by one, they were swept away. 200 meters behind me, a small convoy, followed with extreme caution. 3 private cars and a van maintained an absolutely safe distance, not daring to get close. They were careful not to cross the line. They didn't want to anger the monster in front, but they couldn't afford to fall behind and lose my protection. I had detected these followers on my rear radar long ago. I didn't drive them away because they weren't a threat. They weren't costing me anything. In fact, they served a purpose. I watched them in the rearview mirror, knowing they'd be the first to hit if something attacked from behind. Could they be the perfect alarm system? My convoy finally reached the outskirts of the city. I arrived at the massive bridge, the only way out of town. But at this stage, society hadn't exactly become a paradise. The entrance was completely blocked by over a dozen trucks. Light planes and crudely modified SUVs obstructed the path. Thugs with shotguns and axes stood on the roofs, their faces twisted with malice. "Stop! Pull over right now!" A bald man shouted from the top of a pickup truck. This man, Robert, was frantically waving a red flag. To them, any vehicle trying to escape the city had to pay a heavy toll to pass through. The survivors who had been tailing me clearly didn't have the stomach for this. They panicked and slammed on their brakes until their tires screeched to a halt. Some of them were so terrified that they even tried to turn their cars around. But as for me, I didn't hesitate for a second. My speed didn't drop even a single mile per hour. In fact, I did the exact opposite. I floored the accelerator, my massive rig casting a giant shadow. The sun was positioned perfectly behind me. My shadow quickly engulfed the entire barricade. The bald man's arrogant smirk instantly vanished. As I got closer, he finally realized what was charging at them. "Is that a truck?" The bald man shrieked in absolute terror. He threw down his flag and scrambled to hide inside a Range Rover. His thugs finally started to move, but they were half a second too late. One of them raised a shield out of pure, desperate reflex. Another fired his gun, acting on blind instinct. The bullet struck the heavy-duty tire of my truck. My eyes were cold as I watched them. That one shot had just signed their death warrants. They were dead men walking. The massive steel plow on the front of my truck was ready. The V-shaped ram slammed into their line with a thunderous crash. I plowed through the barricade like it was made of cardboard. I smashed through the barricade of pickup trucks. I hit the SUVs like a bowling ball. I crashed right into the middle of their defensive line. The bald man didn't even have time to find his friend before he was swept off the street. He never made it inside his car. It was a total disaster. The shockwave of the impact sent him flying through the air. He slammed hard against the concrete wall. He tumbled over the guardrail like a rag doll. His fate sealed. He disappeared into the darkness on the other side of the bridge. Up ahead, I spotted an abandoned service area. I finally gripped the wheel and turned off the road. The students behind me had never seen anything like this. Nothing could have prepared them. I needed to stop for a moment, not to rest, but to process the data from the cores I had just absorbed. And while I was at it, I had to deal with my followers. The small cars trailing behind me came to a halt as well. They stopped immediately, but they didn't dare get any closer. They stopped 50 meters back. Their doors swung open and several people stepped out, trembling. A middle-aged man in a suit stood there, clutching a crumpled pack of cigarettes. Beside him was a young couple, leaning on each other just to stay upright. Then there was a girl in overalls, gripping a heavy wrench. They shared a nervous look. They summoned their courage and walked toward my massive mining truck. It loomed over them like an iron fortress. I swung the cabin door open and stared them down. I didn't bother getting out. I just watched from the heights. I tightened my grip on my modified nail gun. I looked at them coldly and finally spoke. You followed me all this way. Now it's time to pay the toll. It was a joke, obviously, but in this silence, it sounded like a final sentence, like a word from a god. The middle-aged man scrambled to the front of the group. He shouted with a trembling voice, "Boss, no, my lord. Thank you for clearing the way for us back there. We don't have any bad intentions. We have food and water. It's all in the car, and it's all for you. We only beg that you allow us to follow you." A mocking smile played across my lips. Did they really think they could keep up with me? Even if it costs us our lives, we will follow you. The young woman suddenly shouted those words. There was a fierce determination in her eyes. She looked about my age, and she wasn't backing down. You're going to build a base, aren't you? I'm a mechanical engineering student, I know. About repairs and maintenance. I can be useful. I arched an eyebrow, remembering my past life. I preferred being alone back then. But that was exactly how they managed to ambush me in my sleep. Even though I now have this invincible fortress, a man still needs to rest eventually. And there are certain minor tasks that really do need someone to take care of them. I remained silent, weighing my options. For a moment, the atmosphere in the clearing felt heavy. The others held their breath, waiting. They were waiting for the verdict on their fate. I holstered my pistol. I don't keep parasites around. My voice remained cold as ice. But to them, my words didn't seem like a problem. To them, my voice sounded like heavenly music. If you want to follow me, don't fall behind. And keep your distance from my vehicle. Stay back 100 meters. If you dare to cross that line. I pointed to the mangled excavator tread hanging from my wheel. That will be the result. With that, I turned back toward the house. I slammed the heavy armored door shut. The metallic thud echoed through the air. The engineering student, Susanna, stared at my machine. She looked at the yellow monster with a spellbound expression. There was a look of pure fascination in her eyes. Now this is true beauty, she whispered. Industrial beauty. Meanwhile, a group of officers huddled together inside the police station cabin. I sat back and watched the glowing green dots flickering on my radar. Over 1.5 million people across the country had already been located. With the ally markers set, I pulled a crumpled map from my pocket. My finger landed right on a red circle, the location of the king. The city's underground anti-aircraft bunker, a legendary military supply depot, held the reactor components I needed for the next phase of evolution.